Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Let's dive deep into Sri Bhagavan's teachings. The last time we read together, we ended with a passage that was a reference to Kundalini that has reference to the Taittiriya Upanishad. So today we'll pick up with dialogue number 300, December 25th, 1936. A brahmachari youth, a student, who has graduated in science, has been waiting here for grace for the last 4 or 5 months, in order that some job might drop on him like a ripe apple from the tree. He has been making no other efforts to secure a job. His brother yesterday came here to take him away to his parents, but the youth declined to go. An appeal was made to Sri Bhagavan. Sri Bhagavan said, "I do not tell anyone to come, nor ask him to go. Everyone pleases himself here. He says he finds peace in the hall, and he also wants a job. Evidently the job must be found in the hall itself, so that his peace may not be disturbed. Peace is not in the hall, it is in the repose of the self. It can be gained anywhere." Some days later the youth threw away his sacred thread and appeared before Sri Bhagavan with his limbs shaking, which the young man later described as his bliss, Ananda. Sri Bhagavan told him not to make a habit of sitting in front of him in the hall and ordered him out. Furthermore, he continued, "Even a fledgling is protected by the parent birds only till such time it grows its wings. It is not protected forever. Similarly with devotees, I have shown the way. You must now be able to follow it up and find peace wherever you are." The young man thinks that Sri Bhagavan gave him upadesh, spiritual instruction, in the following words: "The self, that is the ego, must be subdued by oneself." The man, however, has refused the offer of a job to him in one of the local schools and thinks that he has been given a mighty job by the hill or by Sri Bhagavan. What that job is, the world will know later, he says. He had further anticipated all this day's occurrences some months ago and had foretold them to his mother and to his friends. He is further happy at the happenings. Sri Bhagavan, however, compared him to another man who is in no way of the right type, and yet the boy thinks that he is Bhagavan in embryo. Later he turned mad and died.
Two points are salient in this entire passage. One is the mistaking of an aberrant state of mind for profound spiritual experience. The other is, what does one go to a holy presence for? Does one go to Sri Bhagavan for a job? What do we go to Sri Bhagavan for? What is the opportunity? What the immensity of grace? What the profundity of wisdom imparted? What experience is actually available? What realization? All these things should be considered and deeply contemplated by the aspirant for truth. The first point mentioned is the mistaking of aberrant states of mind for spiritual experience. The two are not to be confused. Spiritual experience is the deep peace of the self, as mentioned by Sri Bhagavan. Eccentric ways of thinking are just that, eccentric ways of thinking, and nothing more. There's nothing particularly profound about the young man's desire to have a job, or that the job was going to be a world-changing job, according to him, or the idea that he could foretell various happenings in advance. There's nothing particularly profound in any of that, is there? But if he had taken the instruction of Sri Bhagavan to actually turn within and found peace, the peace of the self that is transcendent of the body, location, and the world, now that would have been profound. That would have been truly spiritual. Bhagavan had told him, evidently the job must be found in the hall itself so that his peace may not be disturbed. Of course, he's being quite humorous about this. Then he instructs, peace is not in the hall, it is in the repose of the self. It can be gained anywhere. If we are bodies, then our experience is limited by the place and time in the world. But are we bodies? As the self is not the body, realization of the self is not determined by the location of the body. Similar is it with activities of the body. The simple truth is the self is not the body, and we should know ourselves as that bodiless self, the only self that there actually is. If one turns within to know the self, peace is there regardless of wherever the body happens to be. If one does not turn within to know the self, there's no peace to be found no matter where one happens to be, even if one was in the sacred hall of Sri Bhagavan. In short, one should not look without for what is within. But if you look within, you are sure to find it, because it is you. Dialogue 301. A gentleman enthusiastically recounted several of his experiences on following Sri Bhagavan's instructions, and incidentally mentioned that he and Sri Bhagavan were born on the same day of the week and bore the same name. Sri Bhagavan completed, adding, "The same self is in both." The comment by Sri Bhagavan is not only humorous and loving, but also exceedingly profound. If you receive spiritual instruction and comprehend it, what is that which has the capacity to comprehend? If there is spiritual experience, it wells up from within. It does not come from without. It wells up from within. What is that from which it wells up? That which is the source of the instruction is the very nature of the instructed. In self-knowledge, the source of the teaching itself, and the recipient of it are one and the same. The self reveals itself to itself. No other is involved. The same self is in both. If the self of Sri Bhagavan is actually yourself, then that means there's no scope left for an individualized existence or an ego. The self, as revealed by Sri Bhagavan, precludes any possibility of another identity, such as an I, a mind, a body, so forth and so on. If we truly, deeply comprehend what he has said in one sentence, the same self is in both, what is there left to be realized? Where is the scope for an unrealized one? Dialogue 302. A young man from Trichy asked Sri Bhagavan on the mention of in Upadesha Manjari, the same text we know as origin of spiritual instruction. In Upadesha Manjari, of Atyanta vairagyam, total dispassion, as the qualification of a ripe disciple. He continued, what is vairagya? Detachment from worldly pursuits and desire for salvation. Is it not so? Sri Bhagavan replied, "Who has not got it? Each one seeks happiness, but is misled into thinking pain-associated pleasures as happiness. Such happiness is transient. His mistaken activity gives him short-lived pleasure. Pain and pleasure alternate with one another in the world. To discriminate between the pain-producing and pleasure-producing matters and to confine oneself to the happiness-producing pursuit only is vairagya. What is it that will not be followed by pain? He seeks it and engages in it. Otherwise, the man has one foot in the world and another foot in the spiritual pursuit, without progressing satisfactorily in either field." A question was again raised regarding the function of the Guru. The Maharshi replied, "Because the man is not able to help himself, finding himself too weak, he seeks more strength in the shape of a Guru." The question was, what is vairagya? What is dispassion? What is detachment? The Maharshi begins his response by asking, who has not got it? Is it the Supreme Self, which is one without a second, without differences, the perfect fullness in itself? Is that lacking in dispassion? Does that have attachment? If not, can there really be a second self in you who is attached and lacking in dispassion? Vairagya or detachment at first seems as if something to obtain, but really it is of the very nature of the self. The utterly transcendent is the perfectly detached. So, he asks, who has not got it? If we inquire like this, complete detachment becomes our own. But he compassionately and very graciously continues to give further instruction on the matter and says, each one seeks happiness but is misled into thinking pain-associated pleasures as happiness. Such happiness is transient. His mistaken activity gives him short-lived pleasure. Pain and pleasure alternate with one another in the world. Seeking for happiness, always seeking for happiness. Isn't that the case? What is the nature of happiness? And what is its source? The source of happiness is actually within. It is the self. The same self is the very nature of happiness, the substance, as it were, of happiness. In delusion, one thinks the happiness is missing and seeks to obtain it from elsewhere. Mistaking, as Sri Bhagavan points out, pleasurable sensations, pleasurable activities, as being happiness, which he points out are associated with pain. Pleasure and pain of the body, for example, alternate with each other. If our happiness is dependent upon the pleasant sensations of the body, what are we going to do when the pain comes? We will then be unhappy. Real happiness is of a spiritual nature and transcends the sensations of the body. Pleasure and pain in the world and of the body, of the senses, is one thing. Happiness, profound happiness, is quite another. He says, to discriminate between the pain-producing and pleasure-producing matters, and to confine oneself to the happiness-producing pursuit only is vairagya. That is, to lift one's entire experience completely beyond the oscillations of pain and pleasure provided by the senses and the body and the world, and to have as one's entire focus the realization of the inner source of happiness. That is the detachment or dispassion, the vairagya questioned about. What is it that will not be followed by pain? Certainly every sensation is transitory. So if you're looking for happiness, don't bother looking in sensations. Look within. Happiness is not to be found in sensations, in outer objects. Where is it to be found? If it is within, what is the nature of within? What is it that will not be followed by pain? He seeks it and engages in it. What is it? The knowledge of one's true self. That reveals happiness. Truly, bliss that is uncaused and unconditioned. It is endless. It is also beginningless. Not being an object, it is not subject to creation and destruction. Engage yourself in seeking the knowledge of the self, and abide in that, as that. Thereby you will not only find happiness, you will actually be the happiness that you find. What comes, goes, but what you are is forever. Otherwise, Sri Bhagavan continues, the man has one foot in the world and another foot in the spiritual pursuit. If we wish to have spiritual realization, we must give ourselves to it wholeheartedly, unreservedly. If you give yourself partially, the best you can hope for is partial results. One should devote oneself to spiritual practice with the same intensity, the same completeness as one wishes the result to be. So if we want full happiness, continuous happiness, Inquire, devote yourself fully and continuously. It's that simple. In relation to the other question, the Maharshi said, because the man is not able to help himself, finding himself too weak, he seeks more strength in the shape of a guru. The guru provides spiritual strength. What is the nature or quality of that spiritual strength? What is it that Sadguru Ramana gives? It's not tangible to the senses, but it is very real. It's not something that can be measured in worldly terms, but it is a strength that outlasts the world. It's the strength with the characteristics of peace, of freedom, of illuminating wisdom. Indeed, the nature of that strength is quite incomprehensible. It's the strength of reality, of existence itself. And in that strength of existence, the truly non-existent, the unreal, vanishes. The power of such a guru is such that the unreal vanishes and the reality stands self-revealed. Darkness vanishes and the light of truth alone remains. Death vanishes and immortality remains. Now that's strength. Dialogue 303. Mr. K.R.V. Iyer sought more light on nada, sound, subtle vibration. The Maharshi replied, he who meditates on it feels it. There are 10 kinds of nadas. After the final thundering nada, the man gets laya, dissolution. That is his natural and eternal state. Nada, jyoti means light, or inquiry, thus take one to the same point, And then in parentheses, the recorder is added. The former are indirect, and the last is direct. The disciple then asked, "The mind becomes peaceful for a short while and again emerges forth. What is to be done?" The Maharshi replies, "The peace often gained must be remembered at other times. That peace is your natural and permanent state. By continuous practice it will become natural. That is called the current. That is your true nature. Nada, photisms, etc. imply the existence of triputi, the triads of cognizer, cognition, and the cognized. The current resulting from investigation for the self is Shuddha triputi, or pure triad, that is to say, undifferentiated triad. It is in the very nature of every objective appearance, gross or subtle, to change. Mutability is its very character. One may meditate upon nada, jyoti, sound, light, etc. But as these are still objective, though subtly so, the resultant peace will fade. What is to be done? The questioner has described this in his own doubt that he raises. He feels peace for a while, and then it goes. The Maharshi replies, "The peace often gained must be remembered at other times. That peace is your natural and permanent state. By continuous practice, it will become natural. That is called the current. That is your true nature." What is meant by remembering the peace? If we just think about it, thoughts are not constant. It will not be permanent. Remembrance must signify something else. Similarly, the experience of subtle sound or subtle light, nada, jyoti or photisms, etc., are not constant. Even if one remembers them later, still the memory of it will not be constant. How to have constant peace? Sri Bhagavan says the peace is our natural and permanent state. That means that it's not to be newly acquired, but simply needs to be revealed. Knowledge in the form of inquiry reveals it. It is inquiry or knowledge regarding oneself, not an object, gross or subtle, but oneself. The knowledge, which is peace itself, that is sought, will, by the practice of inquiry, constant inquiry, be revealed as one's natural state. Natural means innate. Not only is it one's natural state, it is one's true nature. and therefore not actually a state at all. This realized knowledge, this self, which is all peace in itself, is not differentiated. In all other experience, there is the knower, the knowing, and the known. Here referred to as the cognizer, the cognition, and the cognized. But he says the current resulting from investigation for the self is undifferentiated, or pure triad. If it is undifferentiated, it's not a triad at all, is it? The individualized knower, the objective portion of the experience known, and the relation between them, the knowing, are all fabrications of the mind. The knowledge of the self, which is peace, is mind transcendent. Therefore, inquire into your own nature. Find that in you which is transcendent of the mind.
This sounds very similar to the first invocatory verse in the 40 verses on reality.
All the teaching of Sri Bhagavan does.
I'd almost do for sure if I said that, because it's all the... Because there he talks about the way to remember it is abidance therein. And here when he uses the word current, is that also the same as existence?
Well, he first says that is called the current. That is your true nature. Later he says the current resulting from investigation for the self is undifferentiated.
Would that be the sound current he's talking about?
No. Sound would still be differentiated, wouldn't it? There'd be the sound and the knower of the sound and his knowing of it. But in the absolute self, there is no such threefold division. In the self, being is knowledge. The current referred to, therefore, is that of knowledge. You inquire. You learn to inquire continuously. That is the current referred to. What appears as a current in practice is revealed as the innate continuity of the existence of the self in realization. Where one hears something, sees something, etc., other, whether of the world or subtly of the mind, there is illusion. Where one sees no other, hears no other, etc., neither the mind nor the world exists, that is knowledge.
two kinds of knowledge that I'm aware of. One is absolute knowledge of the self, and the other is relative knowledge, the sciences and all the stuff you go to school to learn. So does the mind know this relative stuff, or is there's only one knower? So can you say the mind knows this, or
You can
the soul
say-
knows this, or
You can say the mind knows it, but it's borrowed light.
it's pardon?
It's borrowing light,
Oh, right. Borrowing light. It's borrowing consciousness.
so to speak.
Yeah.
The reflected light or borrowed light of consciousness appears as the mind, the intellect, which holds all these ideas. When the intellect subsides, so does all that learning. As in deep dreamless sleep. There's no mind activity and you don't remember anything that you've learned. But you still exist, and the knowledge of your existence is still there.
When you come back into one of the other states, you remember the relative knowledge again, right? Through memory.
That's one explanation. It's as good as any. The thing to do is to find out who comes back, who appears, since the existence in deep sleep still exists now, and since your identity invariably feels singular, you do not have multiple existences. We should therefore inquire, as for whom is this state, waking, dream, etc.? For whom are the states of mind? And thereby realize pure consciousness, which alone is existence, which alone actually is the self. There is one knower, as you rightly said. His nature is consciousness. So there is actually one kind of knowledge. When to that knowledge is added limitations in the various forms of thought, it appears as what you call a relative mind. The consciousness, though, illuminating all of that, is only one. It is unformed, and it is transcendent of the thoughts.
So the objective knowledge you get through your mind, is that illusionary? Is that is it permanent for all time? I mean, if you take relative knowledge like science, for one thing, they find the laws of nature that seem to be permanent through time and space.
As long as the world appears, they seem as if permanent. When the world no longer appears, likewise the sciences and the laws and thoughts regarding such. It's just as in a dream. In a dream, you experience a dream world, and there are dream laws, dream sciences. Maybe they correlate to the waking state version, maybe they don't. It is only so long as the dream world appears that such occur. When the dream disappears, all of that also disappears. It is all in the mind. The world and the characteristics of the world, such as is determined by the various sciences, all of that is only in the mind. The one thing that is actually real in your dream is invisible in the dream. It is the consciousness, the only substance there. But it does not appear in the forms of the dream. And as long as one grasps the forms of the dream, maintaining the belief in the dream character and its corresponding dream world, the consciousness is not known. When you wake up, how do you view all that? When you wake up, the triad of the dreamer, his dreaming, and the thing he was experiencing all vanish. The consciousness alone remains. That is truly permanent, not just long-lasting in a state of mind.
And is that what they mean by, so I don't know the exact words, something once known, all else is known? Is that the
That's right.
light of consciousness they're talking about?
That's right.
But they're not referring to when all else is known, they're not referring to the relative knowledge that you go to school to learn, really.
No, knowing reality does not imply a detailed knowledge of the illusion. Just as when you wake up, it does not mean that you know all the dream events that are still supposedly going on. Rather, you know that none of them are going on.
So it all boils down to what's real and what's not real.
Precisely so.
And when you find something that's real, it kind of sticks in your consciousness more than before. So you would focus on it more, right? You would keep your attention on it more.
Is that your experience?
I think so.
Okay. We are drawn to that which is real. We are drawn to that which is unreal only for the sake of the real. The unreal appears as real only due to lack of knowledge, lack of discrimination, lack of clarity. But it's our nature to be drawn to the real, because our nature is the real. That same real existence is the happiness referred to earlier by Sri Bhagavan. All are drawn to happiness. One pursues even unhappy things in the quest for happiness. That's what he really wants. Likewise, the real and the unreal. The sciences and such are all trying to know something. What is that thing they're trying to know? As long as oneself, that is the perceiver, is not thoroughly known, the perceptions will appear as a mirror image of the perceiver. So if embodied, then he sees a world. If he's individualized, he sees other things. If he thinks he's inside a body, there's things external to himself. All according to what one regards as his identity. But what is it that is real when we do not posit any false definitions for our identity? What is the perceiver and what the perceived? What is the knower and what is the known? If you want to know reality, therefore, know yourself.